Okay. Well, thanks for being here. I'm not sure that is recording. Did it tell you guys it was recording?
Yeah, it said it was.
Okay,
Yes, it is
good.
recording.
Excellent. So this is a strange time of year. I wanted to pull you together because it's vastly different regarding federal funds this year than it has been in years past. Usually by this time, we have from the Department of Education preliminary allocations. We usually have them by the middle of April or March, April at the latest. Last year we got them in April, years previous it was March. We don't have preliminary allocations yet, and the Department of Education, at least regarding federal funds, is pretty silent. I'm imagining with everything that's happened, they're kind of sneaking around in their slippers, trying not to be seen at this point. So we just haven't heard a lot of information about what's going on. I wanted to take the opportunity today. We have gotten information through some of our membership organizations through the state, NASPA, CCSSO, and both of those organizations work with the Bruman Group. That's their legal counsel who spends, that's what they do their entire day and week is participate in what's happening politically with regards to education and federal funding. So we've gotten some updates from them. So I just wanted to share with you what we do know. And because this year is different, the Title I Committee of Practitioners serves a role in that. So if we have to make decisions regarding how funding works or how it's going to be allocated out to LEAs, your participation and your feedback will be invaluable. Let me share my screen. We always work in teams in our office. So I can never figure out exactly how to do. Okay, there we go. So just to set a context with you briefly, we're here as a Title I committee of practitioners specifically for that federal piece of funding, Title I. And the purpose of Title I, as you know, is it's to provide funding for areas that experience economic disadvantage. So what Congress through this law understands is that economic disadvantage places certain barriers to students to achieve at the same level as other students with regards to funding for staff members or technology or materials or training, things like that, that can make that situation so those students can achieve. Statutorily, the Title I Committee of Practitioners, you are to review and advise regarding state rules, regulations, and policies that would impact the goals of Title I to make sure that we're conforming to those purposes. So today, you don't really have to make a lot of decisions, but you may because of what's happening currently politically with regards to federal funds. So here's essentially the purpose. And believe me, I am no political master when it comes to how this works, but this is the way it was shared with me from the Bruman Group to try to explain to all of us like me in general terms how funding works regarding education at the federal level. And there's a process to it. At the federal budget proposal, the president begins with a budget proposal, and this outlines prior to the upcoming fiscal year, but it's the budget for everything that Congress has oversight for. Education's a small piece of that. Title I is just a subsection of that. Once the budget is proposed by the president, he sends it to congressional appropriations, and they do these appropriations committees. Because education is a smaller piece and Title I is a subset of that, it generally goes to subcommittees, goes to the House and the Senate. They each have a subcommittee to decide what the budget would be. They make proposals to each other and they negotiate. When they come to an agreement on what that budget would be, and I'll now just speak specifically for Title I, they submit that up to Congress. Both chambers of Congress must pass those appropriation bills. If there are differences, they send them back to those subcommittees to renegotiate and resubmit that proposal. Once Congress, both houses of Congress have approved those budgets, it goes to the president to sign. Once it's signed, it becomes law under the act of Every Student Succeeds. Then the Department of Education takes that lump sum amount and starts to calculate what allocations would be. For Title I, and I'll go into this a little bit later in detail, for Title I, it goes through various grants. So there are 4 statutory grants that they must allocate. And what's interesting about Title I, they don't allocate it to the state, or they don't calculate it by the state. They calculate it by school districts within the state. So they'll do a total for Alpine District, they do a total for Provo, for Iron, for Jordan. And then once all those calculations are completed, then they submit a preliminary allocation or a final allocation to the state. And then when it comes to us at USBE, we have to do certain things with that to calculate what allocations or appropriations would be for charter schools and then some of the set-asides off the top. And we're informal here, so if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them the best I can. But this is the process in a normal year, how that works. And as I said at the beginning, at this point, we would have had preliminary allocations because all of those votes and agreements and signatures would have been completed at this point. But if you've been following the news and hearing some of the announcements that have come out, there are a number of things that have happened. On March 11th, this happened to us last year, but this year was a little bit wilder. The House passed a full year continuing resolution. So to avoid government shutdown, which would include the Department of Education, they kept funding at the 2024 level through September 30th, 2025. At the same time, the new Secretary of Education initiated a RIF, a reduction in force of 50% to the Department of Education. And you've heard in the news all of those departments that were impacted. The one department that didn't get RIFed was the Office of Elementary Secondary Education, including Title I staff. So they're still working. 50% of that staff got RIFed. March 14th, the Senate passed the continuing resolution. So everything's a go until September 30th. And March 15th, President Trump signed that continuing resolution into law. Then 5 days later, on the 20th, President Trump signed an executive order to eliminate the Department of Education. Well, the president doesn't have the authority to eliminate the Department of Education because the Department of Education is actually an act. It's actually law that it exists. So to eliminate the department, Congress would have to change the law to eliminate that. So it would take an act of Congress to eliminate the department. However, there's a lot of things. You can move the chairs around, you can move people around, you can move departments around, but the Department of Education takes a congressional act. I think it's also important to note that the Department of Education Act and the Every Student Succeeds Act are different acts. So even if the Department of Education was eliminated through Congress, there's still the Every Student Succeeds Act, meaning all of those titles and the funding that's required to implement those particular acts would still exist. So this is where some of the unknown comes in. So this year we think, so this is where we are this year. And we'll share this out with you, this PowerPoint. I put some links in there to congress.gov that explains the processes and the Department of Education Act. I didn't know that it was an actual act until a few months ago when all this information started coming forward. So it was pretty interesting to look through. This is where we are now. So President Trump has submitted a budget proposal. Title I Part A is a part of that. And essentially, he's kept the levels for education in general the same as last year or this current year. So for next year, supposedly the allocations will be the same as they are this year. The interesting thing is what he didn't submit in the proposal were line items. He didn't say for Title One, I'm proposing this much, for Title Three, this much. He just said for education, I'm proposing this much. It's almost in kind of a block grant. So this has been submitted to the Senate and the House. Congress doesn't return to session until this coming Monday. So where we're not seeing any action in these last couple of weeks, it's because the budget has been submitted, the proposal, but nobody's there to really review it. They don't come back until Monday. So that's all still to be determined. The House and the Senate votes to be determined. We don't have a president's signature yet. So the Department of Education is sitting there waiting for an amount. And once they get that amount, the total amount, they can start doing the statutory formulas for Title I. So we're still waiting at USBE for that notification from the Department of Ed. What we have heard is that we probably will not get preliminary allocations. And we know what a burden that puts on districts and charters, because this is the busy time of year where you start to plan for next year with these funds. Who hires, who's going to get paid for those funds, determining preliminary allocations to schools so that schools subsequently can plan. This is the only notification that we've received, and this did not come directly to Utah. Our colleague Val Murdoch, who sits on the board of NASPA, the National Association of ESEA State Program Administrators, participated in one of her board meetings, and a question came through from one of our colleagues in a different state, where they submitted the question to the Department of Education. Fortunately, their Title I federal program officer is the same person that we have, Ariel Jacobs. And this was her response in the email. Essentially, and you can read that, she says, we're still waiting. We're waiting for guidance from OMB on program level allocations. Where the president's proposal was in a block, they're still waiting to see how OMB is going to separate that out, or how they will propose it and provide guidance to the Department of Ed. And not until they get that guidance can they start to do the formula allocations for Title I. So it's a wait and see at this point. We have heard through the Bruman Group that what will probably happen is we'll receive our grant award notification, which will be final allocations without the preliminary allocation. Title I comes out in 2 GANs to a grant award notifications, one on July 1st and then one on October 1st. Those 2 GANs are the total amount that the state will receive. And stop me if you have questions or you have additional information about any of this, or correct me where I'm wrong on this formula. So I want to just go through, this is what the Department of Education and subsequently USBE will have to do when we receive when the Department of Ed receives that appropriation amount. So the Department of Education works closely with the Census Bureau, because Title I funds are focused and directed towards areas of economic disadvantage. They work with the Census Bureau to try to determine poverty levels in district boundary areas. The Census Bureau uses surveys. Every year they send out a random sampling of surveys to determine the poverty levels of students ages 5 through 17 within those areas. Every 10 years, they do the decennial census. The last decennial census was 2010. Because of that census, Utah dropped about 13 million overall from those responses. It was pretty disruptive. 95% of the allocation to the state comes from those Census Bureau counts, and then another 3% comes from publicly supported, so neglected and delinquent counts, foster home counts, and TANF counts. So there are 4 formulas that the Department of Ed has to take that Census Bureau data and run them through 4 statutory formulas. These are required by Act. So the first one is there are eligibility criteria for each one of these particular formulas. Basic, it's you have 10 students in your district. That number exceeds 2% of the Census Bureau's estimated poverty population 5 through 17. The next is targeted. You have 10 students, and that percent exceeds 5% of your population. Concentration, you have 10 students, and your number, and they call, I hate this, but the law refers to those students who are within that category, that poverty threshold, and ages 5 through 17 as formula children. So concentration is you have 10 students, that number exceeds 6,500 or at least 15% of your total population. And then the last one, which it would take, I've tried to figure out how this exactly works, and I've read multiple documents, but they call it the Education Finance Incentive Grant, or the EFIG for short. And it takes a number of factors. First, to qualify an LEA, a local education agency, to qualify for the EFIG grant, you have to qualify first for the basic grant, and then it takes into account certain factors. A state's effort to provide financial assistance to education relative or compared to its relative wealth as determined by per capita income. And then, of course, the allocations, once they do that configuration, which to me is still, I was an English major and I've tried to follow their math, and it's a lot of formulas to figure that out. What we have found, though, is that districts that qualify for basic and targeted usually also receive an EFIG grant. We found that districts and charters that don't qualify for the targeted grant don't usually qualify for the EFIG grant, however that math works out. So when we receive, so once Ed does all those calculations per district, so they don't take into account charter schools because charter schools are not bound by boundaries like districts are. So they do the calculations by school district. So R41 soon to be with Alpine split 44 districts or 42 districts or whatever. It requires us, once we receive that amount at the state, to calculate allocations through the same formulas for charter schools. And then there are some set asides off the top, school improvement, and then we can, if we choose at the state, if we're receiving feedback that we need to provide up to 3% of that allocation for direct student services, mostly for rural districts where schools that are designated for school improvement can't provide services, that their needs assessment and root cause analysis say they need these particular services. Direct services allows for funding to be set aside and given to them to get those services for those students. So here's where it gets a little tricky for USBE and with regards to charters. So the amounts that come to the state are determined by the district LEAs. However, we have 120 and change charter schools that may or may not also be eligible to receive Title I funds. So the 100% level is that Census Bureau poverty level, which I think changed this year. It's up closer to 29,000. So if you are a student between the ages of 5 and 17 and you reported through the Census Bureau that your annual income is $28,000 for a family of 4, and it's a sliding scale, then you are counted for funding for Title I. That's 100%. That's the poverty level. So most charter schools use free and reduced lunch survey counts. Districts also do this to assist in determining allocations to schools. But charter schools do this because they don't have Census Bureau data. So free lunch, the qualification for that is actually 30% higher than the Census Bureau threshold. Reduced lunch is 85% higher. So technically you would be counting more students if you only use those numbers through your October 1 counts to determine Title I amounts. So what we're required to do by law at USBE is we have to use a derived count, meaning we're trying to make it more equitable, more in line with what the Census Bureau counts are. So, we get that amount. We have to take, I'll show you in the next slide here how it works. So just for an example, the October 1 count, free and reduced lunch for the state, and I think this was 2023, was almost 200,000 students. The census count of poverty was half that. It was 52,000, or it was a quarter of that. It was 52,992 students. Here's an example of a district, what that looked like. Pretty big district. Their all student count was 85,000. Their October 1 count of free and reduced lunch students was just a little over 17,000. That would put their economically disadvantaged count at 20%. But the census count for that district said, nah, what was reported through the surveys was just over 5,000 or 6%. So you see, there would be a drastic measure. If we use just for charters the free and reduced lunch count, their counts would be much higher. Here's an example. Here's a charter that had over 1,000 students. Their October 1 count of free and reduced lunch was 669, or 65% would be their economically disadvantaged count. When we do the derived count, and I'll show you how that happens, the math of it, their count was 177, or just over 17%. So there's a big discrepancy, but it puts it more in line equitably with the funds that district LEAs will receive, because their funding is based solely on the census counts and survey counts. Here's how this is just the math of it. So you got that same charter, the derived count. I won't go through this all with you, but what it does is tries to reduce the amount to make it more in line with what the census count would have been had they used census counts to determine their allocations. And just as a reminder, a charter school must have at least 10 students from this derived count, from this reduced count, to qualify for Title I funds. Once they have those 10 students, then we can run their totals through those 4 formula grants: the basic grant, the targeted grant, concentration grant, and the EFIG grant. And so this particular charter that I used as an example here, because their derived count was just over 17%, they qualified for the basic grant, they qualified for the targeted grant, which was 5%. They also qualified for the concentration grant because it was over 15%, and therefore they qualify for the EFIG grant. So this is where we are politically. This is what we're still waiting for in the next number of weeks to come down from the Department of Education. Congress, the House and the Senate, and the president's signature are still pending. The Department of Education will wait for that guidance from OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, on how to start to determine from that block grant that the president proposed to determine allocations, appropriations to the states. What questions do you have? Or corrections, please. If you have additional information or have heard something else, please let us know.
If for some reason the Department of Ed does end up not existing, would they just move the ESEA Act to a different department to oversee?
That's a really great question. So just based on my research, and again, I'm not really a scholar of what Congress does or those particular acts, but we've heard from the president that the intent is to take all the money that was used to fund the Department of Education and all the things that they do, specifically for Title I. They do calculations through those formulas for us so that we don't have to do them, or somebody's going to have to do them. And they also provide technical assistance. And a big thing they do is help us with non-regulatory guidance. So either if they eliminate the Department of Education, some of those actions get transferred to a different office somewhere. They keep a minimal Department of Education, or they send a lump sum of money to the state. Where it would go in the state, I'm not quite sure should that happen. And again, this is all speculative. I don't know. It would, if it goes to the governor's office or the legislature, or comes directly to the State Board of Education, I'm not sure. But we are certainly waiting this year with bated breath to see if the president can have Congress change that act and eliminate the Department of Education.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of unknowns, I should say. But that is a question. That's one of the $1 million questions.
Yeah.
Other questions about where we are with regards to the funding for Title I.
Did I also hear you say that it's possible that you'll just get the two GANs notifications, the one in July and the one in October, without actually receiving a preliminary allocation? So did I understand that, or was that?
Yeah. And for clarification, again, in Utah, I have not received any notification directly from my federal program officer at the Department of Education regarding this. The information that I received was mainly through our membership organizations. So we have, they have meetings, like virtual meetings every week or every couple of weeks. And a representative of the Bruman Group, who is their legal counsel, usually reports back. And what the Bruman Group has reported on their best experience is that we probably won't receive preliminary allocations. We'll just receive the first GAN in July, which is a final allocation. We'll have the applications in Utah grants based on that GAN. So everything's just pushed a little later. The October GAN is the second half of it. There's, as you guys know, that have worked in Utah grants, generally there are some, I don't know, some adjustments to your total allocation. You have to adjust and submit what do you call it?
Amended or revised?
Amended grant or something like that. So that's what we've heard. And again, we're still waiting for direct to Utah, to our office, any communication from the Department of Education. The communication we did get did not come directly to us. It came to one of our partner states, but it was our federal program officer, Ariel Jacobs, that sent that email. Great questions. In other questions? Thank you. So the reason that I felt it was important to share this information with you, where there are a lot of unknowns, the role of the Title I Committee of Practitioners, should decisions need to be made, your feedback and guidance will be paramount in moving forward, because you are representing our education force out there. So what you say we take into account, and it also gets approved through either state board committees or state board, the full state board at a state board meeting. This has happened in the past, and your guidance has really pushed forward some things that the state needed. So moving forward, that may or may not happen. And one thing in the summertime, I generally reach out to you. Steve, I've reached out to you now for I don't know how many years in a row to say, you're on the Title I Committee of Practitioners. Do you want to continue? So, we're kind of running up on the end of the school year and the end of the fiscal year here. So should decisions come in, I'll be, reaching out to you for guidance. Other questions, comments? Okay, I want to thank you so much for being here today in this busy time of year. I thought it was just pretty important to share this with you. Just as an update, one of the things that we did work on previously, 2 meetings ago, I think, was identifying schools to be recognized at the National ESEA Conference as Utah Title I Distinguished Schools. I wrote a new standard operating procedure based on your feedback, and it is now in the final stages of approval. So the next go around, we'll be following that new operating procedure to identify those schools. So your feedback gets used. I'm listening.
Awesome.
Any last comments or questions? Thank you again. I just really appreciate you being here today. Tell Michelle hello, and we missed her, but we were glad you also got to participate. Come anytime. Right, everybody. Happy spring.
Good
Thank
information.
you,
Thanks,
Max.
Max. Take care.
Yep.
Good luck.
Thanks.
See ya.